What if I told you that the happiness you've been chasing your whole life, the one you keep postponing until next year, until the mortgage is paid, until the promotion comes, until the kids are grown? What if that happiness was never something you were supposed to chase at all, but something you were supposed to build today out of the raw materials sitting right in front of you? What if the poorest person on your street already owns the sunset, the bird song, the public library, the flowers in the park across town, and has simply never realized it? And what if the very thing you think is standing between you and joy, your job, your ordinary house, your unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, is actually the workshop where real happiness gets made? Stay with me, because by the end of this book, you're going to look at your own life completely differently. This book was written in 1913 by a man named Orison Swett Marden. Marden knew what he was talking about because his own life could easily have been miserable. He was orphaned as a small child, passed from home to home, worked brutal hours as a boy, and clawed his way up from nothing. And yet, instead of writing a book about how to get rich or how to get even, he wrote a book about how to be happy. He became one of the most beloved self-help writers of his era, the founder of Success Magazine, a man who spent his life studying not just what made people successful, but what made them glad to be alive. The book we are exploring today is called The Joys of Living, and it is exactly what it sounds like, a guidebook, chapter by chapter, to reclaiming the joy that so many of us have quietly let slip through our fingers while we were busy chasing something else. Let us begin. Living today in the here and now. Marden opens with a picture. Imagine a visitor from another planet landing in America. What would he notice first? He would notice that almost nobody is actually living where they are standing. Everyone's eyes are fixed on some far-off point, tomorrow, next year, when the business improves, when the new house is furnished, when the debts are paid. We are all, in Marden's words, trading in futures, building air castles, chasing a rainbow we can never quite reach. And here's the cruel joke buried inside that chase. When tomorrow finally comes, it is still tomorrow. The goalpost keeps moving because we build it to move. He points out something that should stop us cold. Right now, at this very moment, you are living the exact life that your younger self once dreamed about with such longing. The days you're trying to kill right now are the very days your 10-year-old self begged time to slow down for. So why does today feel so ordinary and gray when it once looked so golden to the telescope of youth? Marden's answer is simple and a little unsettling. It is not that life changed. It is that your vision became distorted. You are looking at your own days through the wrong end of the glass. He tells us that happiness does not live in ideal conditions. Any fool can be happy on a beach in paradise. The real art, the mastery, is squeezing joy out of monotonous, difficult, thankless Tuesday. He compares us to bees who manage to find sweetness in the ugliest, most poisonous-looking weeds. If we are ever going to be happy, he says, it will be because we manufactured that happiness ourselves out of the stress and grind of the very day we are living, not because some perfect day arrived to hand it to us. And then there is the past. Marden has strong words here. He says nothing is more foolish than dragging the skeletons of yesterday into today's work. If your past has been unfortunate, bury it, not because the past does not matter, but because carrying it forward drains the exact energy you need to build something better right now. He compares happiness to the manna that fed the Israelites in the desert. It had to be gathered fresh every single day. Try to hoard it. Try to save some of yesterday's joy for tomorrow, and it spoils in your hands. You cannot bank happiness. You can only harvest it daily like ripe fruit. His prescription is almost like a morning vow. Wake up, resolve, no matter what comes, that you will extract something good from this day. Forgive the past before breakfast. Refuse to let old wounds, old failures, old grudges cross the threshold into the day's sacred hours. And do the kind thing now, not someday. Marden is blunt about this. How many of us save our kindness, our flowers, our tender words for the funeral when the person can no longer hear them? Today is the only day you can actually love somebody. Use it. A professional at living. Here Marden asks a pointed question. We spend years becoming experts in our careers. Doctors train for a decade. Lawyers study for years. Craftsman apprentice for a lifetime. But how many of us ever study the one skill that actually determines whether our life feels good or miserable? The skill of living itself. He compares the human body and mind to the most delicate machine ever built, more intricate than any automobile, and yet most of us operate it with zero training. We would never hand a stranger the keys to an expensive car and send him across the country with no instruction. Yet we let our own untrained minds drive us through decades of life. And we are shocked when the machine breaks down. Marden zeroes in on temper and tired nerves as the great saboteurs. He notes something fascinating. Almost everyone has at least one person in their life in whose presence they would never lose their temper, no matter the provocation. That proves self-control is not some impossible feat. It is a muscle we simply are not using consistently. If you can be gentle and composed in front of someone you respect, you already have a capacity to be that way all the time. You are simply choosing unconsciously when to use it. He tells a touching story of an elderly woman having her photograph taken, her face permanently locked into a hard, stern expression that frightened neighborhood children for years. The photographer kept telling her, gently, to brighten her eyes, to look a little pleasanter. She protested that you cannot manufacture cheer on command, but she tried anyway, and when the photograph came back, she was stunned. Her whole face looked 20 years younger. From that day forward, she stood in front of her own mirror each morning and commanded herself out loud to brighten up. And it worked. The lesson Marden wants us to take from this is that cheerfulness is not something that happens to you from the outside. It is something you can generate from the inside deliberately, like turning a dial. He closes this chapter with the image of a watch. A watch does not keep perfect time because of one brilliant spring or one flawless gear. It keeps perfect time because every tiny part works in harmony with every other part. Your happiness works exactly the same way. It is not one big secret. It is a symmetrical, harmonious operation of your whole self, body, mind, and moral nature, all ticking together. The hunt for happiness. Marden opens this chapter with a poem about a man chasing happiness across oceans and mountain ranges, never catching her until he finally collapses from exhaustion and simply starts helping the people around him. And only then does happiness quietly come and sit beside him. This is the whole chapter in miniature. Every human being on earth is hunting for happiness, whether they admit it or not. But almost nobody finds it because they are hunting in the wrong direction. Happiness, Marden insists, cannot be captured through direct pursuit. It is what he calls a product of a deed, not the prize at the end of the chase. It sneaks up on you sideways, usually while you are busy doing something for somebody else. Selfishness, he argues, is the single greatest happiness killer there is. No man has ever found lasting joy through purely selfish seeking, because selfishness violates something built into the very architecture of a human being. We inwardly despise ourselves, whether we admit it or not, for every selfish act we commit. Marden gives us a chilling example of a French revolutionary prosecutor who genuinely claimed pleasure in watching executions, and asks us to notice how twisted a soul must become before cruelty can pass for pleasure. That is not happiness. That is decay wearing happiness's mask. Real happiness, he says, is not the excitement of eating, drinking, or acquiring things. It is described as a mosaic made of tiny stones. A kind word here, a generous act there, a moment of genuine helpfulness somewhere else. None of these tiny stones amounts to much on its own, but set together, they form something of extraordinary and lasting value. And crucially, happiness is described as something born a twin. You cannot chase your own happiness in isolation. It only arrives paired with someone else's. Training the young towards sunshine. Here Marden turns to childhood, and he does not hold back. He believes that most children are trained, quite by accident, toward gloom rather than joy. Parents constantly caution their children not to laugh too loud, not to run, not to make noise, until the child's natural, bubbling gladness gets suppressed right out of existence. A joyless childhood, he warns, is one of the great causes of early aging, not wrinkles from years, but wrinkles from a starved spirit. He compares a child's need for play to a plant's need for sunshine. Suppress the play instinct, and you get a stunted, gnarled adult. The way a plant deprived of light produces nothing but twisted, sickly fruit. And this window does not stay open forever. It is now or never with the young plant, he says, and it is now or never with the young child too. Whatever joy is denied in those early years cannot simply be added back later, once the clay of the personality has already hardened. He tells us of Oliver Wendell Holmes, who credited his cheerful, long life to a childhood nurse who refused to let him dwell on his bumps and scrapes, always redirecting his attention towards something charming or pleasant instead. That single habit, practiced daily throughout his boyhood, became the sunshine of his whole life. Marden's plea here is essentially this: teach children a philosophy of joy as deliberately as you teach them arithmetic. Do not just train their minds for business. Train their cheerful faculties on purpose with the same seriousness. A happy childhood is not a luxury. It is a foundation stone of a happy, capable adult. Riches and happiness. This is one of Marden's most passionate chapters, and it opens with a challenge. If wealth truly produced happiness, then every rich person on earth would be happy and every poor person miserable. But we all know that is not how it actually works. He quotes George Pullman, the railroad car magnate, who after becoming a multimillionaire admitted he was not one bit happier than in the days he had nothing. He quotes Russell Sage calling riches vanity and vexation of spirit. These are not poor men complaining about wealth from the outside. These are men who had all the money in the world telling us, from the inside, that it did not deliver what it promised. Marden describes money madness as a disease almost identical to drug addiction. The money-hungry mind, like the addicted mind, loses its moral compass, develops a cunning obsession with acquiring more, and slowly kills off its owner's capacity for empathy. And here's the trap. Desire is insatiable. The more you get, the louder the craving grows. Gratifying a selfish craving does not satisfy the soul's hunger. It actually deepens it. He gives us the story of a humble mechanic whose wealthy employer looks down on him for never striking out to make his own fortune. But the mechanic makes a sharp distinction. There's winning at your narrow specialty and making money, and there's succeeding at living all along the line, which means growing as a person while you work. By that second, truer measure, the mechanic considers himself the richer man, whatever his employer's bank account says. And then there's the story of John Greenleaf Whittier's humble cottage in Massachusetts, worth only a few $100s, yet visited by pilgrims from across oceans because a great soul once lived there. Nobody makes pilgrimages to the homes of forgotten millionaires. Selfishness, Marden says, has no immortality in it. What endures is what was given, not what was hoarded. Enjoying without owning. This chapter contains one of the most freeing ideas in the whole book. Marden tells the story of a French marquis who lost his grand estate, but consoled himself brilliantly. He simply decided to enjoy the public gardens of Paris as if they were his own. When I walk through these gardens, he said, I fancy myself their owner, and they are mine. All these visitors are my guests, and I never have the trouble of entertaining them. Marden takes this idea and runs with it. The title deed to a piece of land, he argues, is not what actually delivers the beauty of that land into your soul. Your eye does that. The wealthy man who owns a mountain view gets no more visual pleasure from the sunset than you do, standing beside him for free. The parks, the public libraries, the rivers, the mountains, the stars, the change of seasons. These all belong just as much to you as to the richest person in your city. You are, in a very real sense, already a land proprietor of thousands of acres. You have simply never collected the deed in your mind. He points to Henry Ward Beecher, who loved to window shop during the holidays purely for pleasure of it, never needing to buy a single thing to enjoy the display. Thoreau, Emerson, Phillips Brooks. Marden calls these men rich without money because they had trained themselves to extract wealth from everything they touched, the way a bee extracts honey from the most unpromising, unattractive flower. The secret, as Marden puts it, is a cheerful, contented mind. He who is dissatisfied is poor no matter his bank balance, and he who is content is rich even if he never signs a single deed. The sin of tired nerves. Now Marden gets practical, almost medical. He argues that a shocking amount of the cruelty and unhappiness in ordinary homes has nothing to do with a lack of love. It comes from something far more physical, exhausted nerves, overworked people, running on insufficient sleep, constant interruption, and monotonous strain, say cutting things they never meant, not because their hearts are unkind, but because their nervous system has simply run out of the resources needed for patience. He is especially sympathetic to overworked wives and mothers of his era, pointing out that most husbands, with their regular hours and clear boundaries between work and rest, would become nervous wrecks within 3 months if they traded places with their wives, who often work longer hours with far more interruptions and far less recognition. Marden's advice is refreshingly simple. When you feel your self-control slipping, stop. Get outside if you can. Get sunlight. Eat food that nourishes the nerves rather than punishes them. He insists that sunlight is as necessary to human happiness as it is to a peach tree, and that a walk outdoors can restore a mental balance that hours of willpower alone cannot. He also takes aim at the myth of the overworked hero, the young lawyer who works 15 hours a day because he believes constant grinding beats smart, well-rested effort. Marden watched such a man burn out completely. His health destroyed right at the moment his career should have been flourishing. The lesson is blunt. A fatigued brain cannot produce quality work, no matter how many hours you force it to sit at the desk. Robust health, he insists, is the very foundation on which happiness, ambition, and achievement are all built. Neglect it, and everything constructed on top of it eventually cracks. By the way, if you are enjoying this deep dive into a century-old book that somehow still feels like it was written for exactly the stress you are carrying today, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because we still have a great deal of wisdom left to cover, and you will not want to miss where this goes next. Think health and joy. Marden continues the mind-body thread here, but pushes even further into the territory of self-pity. He described a man of real natural ability who slowly destroyed himself through constant self-analysis, endlessly monitoring his food, his temperature, his symptoms, until he had talked himself into a state of complete helplessness. Physicians examined him and found nothing physically wrong. His conviction of weakness, not any actual weakness, had become his prison. This leads Marden to one of his sharpest lines. No man can get beyond his own convictions. If you believe deep down that you cannot do something, that belief becomes a wall every bit as real as a physical one. He tells us about a physician who prescribed something delightfully simple to melancholy patients. Turn up the corners of your mouth, force a smile, genuine or not, and hold it. Patients who complied, even skeptically at first, found their mood actually lifting to meet the expression on their face. The body, it turns out, can lead the mind just as easily as the mind leads the body. Marden also criticizes how children are raised around the subject of sickness. A child constantly warned about disease, constantly hearing sick talk, grows up believing that suffering is simply the natural, expected condition of human life. He argues the opposite should be instilled, that health, not sickness, is a natural birthright, and that discord in the body is simply the temporary absence of harmony, not some inevitable fate closing in. And here is a beautiful, almost mathematical point he makes. Happiness itself conserves energy. A person at peace wastes very little vitality, because there is no friction burning it away. The more harmonious you become, the more resistant you become to illness, simply because your system is not constantly hemorrhaging energy into anxiety and discord. The joys of imagination. This chapter contains one of the most touching stories in the entire book. Marden describes an elderly invalid woman, confined almost entirely to her house, who nonetheless lives an extraordinarily rich life through what she calls her mental vacations. Each day, in her imagination, she revisits her childhood home in Sorrento, watches the sailboats on the Bay of Naples, attends the opera, reads Shakespeare, and pictures the great actors performing it just for her. She insists these imaginary journeys are sometimes more enjoyable than actual travel, because they come with none of travel's discomfort or expense, and all of its wonder. Marden's larger point is that the imagination is a gift most of us drastically undervalue. We were given this faculty, he says, precisely so that no prison, no illness, no poverty could ever fully lock us out of joy. He reminds us of John Bunyan, who wrote one of the great masterpieces of English literature while sitting in a jail cell, because iron bars, it turns out, cannot actually imprison a trained mind. Stone walls do not a prison make, as the poet Lovelace wrote, nor iron bars a cage. He encourages every person to build what he calls their own personal utopia in the mind, an ideal place they can retreat to at will, where there is no friction, no anxiety, only harmony and rest. People who cultivate this habit, he observes, can absorb the most exhausting, exasperating workday and still emerge serene, because they know how to lift themselves out of their circumstances for a mental recess whenever they need one. Taking life too seriously. Marden opens this chapter with sharp observation from a visiting French woman. Every American she met looked as though he had gone out specifically to borrow trouble, with plenty of it already in hand. Emerson himself remarked that Americans seem to carry care and doubt etched permanently into their faces, that old age, in a sense, begins in the nursery. Marden's diagnosis is that Americans, more than almost any people, take life far too seriously, treating their own small tasks as though the entire fate of the universe hinges on them. He tells the story of sitting through a sermon so gloomy, so devoid of any uplift, that the whole congregation left more depressed than when they arrived. True religion, he insists, has nothing to do with doom and gloom. Its very essence, its mission, is to encourage and exalt, never to weigh down. He makes a compelling business case for play. Of all things, recreation, he argues, is not wasted time stolen from productivity. It is an investment in productivity. Rested minds and bodies produce better work in fewer hours than exhausted minds and bodies produce in many more hours. He points to successful executives of his day who worked only 3 or 4 focused hours daily and still ran enormous enterprises, precisely because their vigor and clarity, not their raw hours logged, were what actually generated results. He closes with a wonderful, almost defiant piece of advice. Take a brace, smile on, laugh out loud, real loud, and stop peddling your disagreeables to everyone around you. Scatter sunshine by the cartload, he says, because people will always take all the sunshine you are willing to give them. Happiness can be cultivated. This chapter is, in many ways, the philosophical spine of the entire book. Marden makes the case that happiness is not some fixed inheritance handed to lucky people at birth. It is a skill cultivable exactly the way a farmer cultivates a crop or a musician cultivates technique. He points to something remarkable about the brain itself. It physically adapts to whatever demands are repeatedly placed on it, just as a vocation shapes certain mental faculties through constant use. So too can deliberate practice strengthen your capacity for optimism. Courage, he notes, was once completely absent in many people who went on to become courageous through nothing more than sustained, intentional practice. If courage can be built this way, so can cheerfulness. He is almost stern about the habit of complaining, describing it as a slow poison that, left unchecked, eventually calcifies into permanent cynicism. The remedy is equally habitual, resolutely determined every single day that you will find the sunny side of whatever happens, that you will notice and cultivate the humorous angle even in difficult circumstances. Marden shares Ella Wheeler Wilcox's wonderfully practical guidance here. Find out what you can do best and do it fully, expecting success no matter the obstacles. If you do not currently love your circumstances, learn to love what you do have until you are able to change it and be happy over something every single day, because the brain is a creature of habit, and you cannot teach it joy in a single moment if you have let it wallow in misery for years. We should treat a discordant negative thought exactly the way we would treat a burglar breaking into our home. He insists, refuse it entry immediately, because such thoughts do not merely visit, they steal, robbing us of comfort and contentment the longer we let them linger. The joys of friendship. Here Marden turns to what he considers one of life's richest and most neglected treasures. He is almost indignant that people take such little care to cultivate their friendships, given how sacred and valuable they are. Most of us, he says, attend to everything else first, and only give friendship whatever leftover scraps of time remain, when we ought to make a genuine business of it. He tells a moving story of loyalty, A man who stood by a friend who had sunk into alcoholism and been abandoned by his entire family, following him through his worst nights in the streets, saving him from freezing, from arrest, from himself, until that steady loyalty eventually helped restore the fallen man to decency and to his home. No amount of money, Marden says, could measure the value of that kind of friendship. He also draws a sharp distinction between friendship and mere acquaintance. Wealthy people, he observes, often mistake the crowd of admirers surrounding their money for actual friends, only to discover, when the money is gone, that most of those relationships evaporate along with it. Real friendship follows you into the shadows just as readily as into the sunshine. Friendship, he insists, must be reciprocal. It cannot be all giving on one side and all receiving on the other, and expect to produce real joy. And your capacity to attract worthy friends is directly tied to the qualities you yourself cultivate. If you are narrow, uncharitable, and stingy with warmth, you should not be surprised when generous, large-hearted people fail to gather around you. Cultivate an open, cheerful, sunny nature, and you'll find that friends flock toward you almost without effort. The tragedy of postponed enjoyment. This might be the most quietly devastating chapter in the entire book. Marden tells the story of a brilliant young man who decides to devote the first half of his life entirely to making $1 million, planning to spend the second half enjoying it. He sacrifices his love of music, his interest in art, everything, promising himself he will indulge these passions later. He reaches his first $1 million and immediately wants two. He reaches two, and ambition demands more still. Eventually, older, wealthier, and shocked by the gray hair and stooped posture staring back at him in the mirror, he tries to finally collect on his promise to himself. He travels to see the great art and architecture of the world, and finds it means nothing to him, his aesthetic faculties having atrophied entirely from decades of disuse. He seeks out music, his first love, and discovers that faculty, too, has gone dormant. He tries to rebuild friendships, and finds those muscles have withered as well. He ends up, in Marden's chilling phrase, like a skyscraper ravaged by fire, a burned-out old man with a fortune and no remaining capacity to enjoy it. The lesson here is not subtle, and it is not meant to be. Whatever faculties you fail to exercise throughout your life will not simply wait patiently for you to retire before you use them. They will atrophy, exactly like an unused muscle, and no amount of money can instantly restore them once they are gone. Deferred happiness, deferred good deeds, Marden insists, simply do not keep. They spoil, like manna left too long in a jar. He gives a beautiful old fable of a maiden walking through a cornfield, told she may keep only the single largest, ripest ear she finds, but she may never turn back once she has passed something by. She keeps hoping a better ear lies further ahead, passes up dozens of perfectly good choices, and walks out the other side of the field having selected nothing at all. That, Marden says, is a tragedy of postponed enjoyment in a single image. The good things were right there, within reach, the entire time. Intellectual and aesthetic joys. Marden believes that education, as it was commonly practiced his day, drastically underemphasized one of humanity's greatest sources of joy, the power of appreciation itself. He argues that cultivating our capacity to appreciate beauty, art, music, and ideas could multiply human happiness many times over. And yet most people go through life what he calls beauty blind. Their aesthetic sense never awakened in the first place. He points out something fascinating about perception itself. The same sunset that sends a thrill of joy through the soul of Ruskin means absolutely nothing to someone whose eye was never trained to receive it. Music does not move a deaf ear, but it also does not move an ear that has simply never learned to listen for meaning. The doors to these joys exist in all of us, but they must be opened, usually through education, exposure, and simple practice. He tells us that Benjamin West became a painter because his mother once kissed him in delighted appreciation of a childish drawing, a single act of encouragement that opened an entire world. He reminds us that Correggio, upon first seeing a Raphael masterpiece, cried out that he too was a painter, his own artistic fire lit instantly by contact with someone else's greatness. The scientist Agassiz appears here too, turning down an offer of funded foreign travel because he preferred to spend his vacation studying the extraordinary richness already present in his own backyard. That is the whole chapter distilled into a single image. The marvels are not necessarily far away. They are often sitting right where you already stand, waiting for a trained eye to notice them. Reading mocketh a full man. Marden considers books to be one of the most democratic luxuries civilization has ever produced. He tells the wonderful story of a village blacksmith who read Richardson's lengthy novel Pamela aloud to an eager audience gathered around his anvil each summer evening. And when the happy ending finally arrived, the delighted crowd rang the church bells in celebration. He is deeply moved by the fact that, thanks to cheap printing, the greatest literary treasures once reserved for the wealthy had, by his era, become available to nearly everyone. A poor person struggling with isolation, he argues, need not feel shut out of society at all, because for the price of a book, they can spend an evening in intimate conversation with the greatest minds who ever lived. He shares Petrarch's beautiful description of his books as friends of every age and country, always available, never troublesome, teaching him how to live and how to die, asking nothing in return but a quiet corner on a shelf. Marden encourages deliberate, purposeful reading over mindless reading for the sake of killing time, insisting that reading without intention becomes its own kind of restless dissipation. He also tells a charming story of a young man who built an entire personal library simply by saving the price of one cigar a day, a small, consistent sacrifice that, compounded over years, produced a collection worth far more than its modest cost. One who has even 100 good books, Marden writes, owns 100 doors, each opening onto a prospect of infinite joy. The alchemy of a cheerful mind. Here Marden gives us the wonderful folk story of Uncle Henry, a farm boy who could turn the most miserable chore, picking stones out of field under the hot sun, into something resembling a treasure hunt, simply by reframing it in his imagination as a gold mining expedition. His companion, Jim, dragging his feet at the start of the day, ends up having the time of his life, purely because Henry brought a different lens to an identical task. This, Marden argues, is the essence of optimism. It is not blindness to hardship. It is a kind of internal prism that separates out the beauty already present in ordinary light. Beauty a pessimist simply fails to notice. He tells the moving story of Smiling Joe, a crippled child strapped to a board for 4 years due to spinal trouble, who nonetheless radiated more genuine cheer than anyone else in the entire hospital, proving that circumstance alone does not determine disposition. He shares an experiment conducted by an ordinary businesswoman who decided, purely out of curiosity, to walk to work one morning insisting to herself that she was happy, no matter what. She found her own posture straightening, her step lightening, and the mood spreading contagiously to everyone she interacted with that day, from the office bookkeeper to her stressed employer. People, she discovered, will meet you halfway if you are only willing to walk that far toward them first. Marden insists that melancholy solemnity, once mistaken for a sign of spiritual depth, should actually be recognized as a symptom of a mind out of harmony. True religion, true character, he says, is bright, hopeful, and beautiful, not cold and dry. Refuse to hang dismal pictures on the walls of your own mind, he urges, echoing Emerson, and instead adopt the motto of the sundial, record none but hours of sunshine. The twin enemies of happiness, fear and worry. Marden identifies fear and worry as the two most persistent thieves of human joy across all history. He opens with a haunting little fable about a magician who transforms a fearful mouse into successively more powerful animals, a cat, a dog, a tiger, only to find that no matter the outward form, the creature remains just as terrified as before, because the fear was never really about the body. It was about the nerve, the inner conviction, which never changed at all. He describes fear's physical toll in vivid, almost clinical detail. It constricts blood vessels, poisons circulation, whitens hair, and etches wrinkles into the face far faster than age itself ever could. Meanwhile, happiness relaxes those same vessels and restores healthy circulation. The emotional state, in other words, is not separate from the body. It is written directly into it. He is particularly critical of how fear surrounding death had, in his time, been instilled in children through religious teaching, arguing that terrifying a child with the specter of dying before waking does lasting psychological harm and creates a lifelong horror that poisons the enjoyment of the present. Death, he insists, is as natural as birth, simply a passage through another door, not something to be dreaded into paralysis. His antidote to fear is not force. Interestingly, he argues you cannot simply punch fear off its throne through sheer willpower. Instead, you quietly invite in something stronger and let that stronger presence gradually displace the old tyrant. That stronger presence, he tells us, has a name. Its name is faith. When faith grows strong enough in the human heart, fear naturally loses its grip, and worry, fear's constant companion, departs right along with it. He also connects worry directly to the era's growing dependence on stimulants and narcotics, observing that people trapped in chronic anxiety often reach for artificial relief, whiskey, tobacco, patent medicines, because they have never learned to generate genuine peace from within. But these substances only ever provide a temporary illusion, always followed by a corresponding crash, a debt that eventually comes due. The strain to keep up appearances kills happiness. Marden tells a sobering true story of a New York widow whose entire estate was sold at auction because she had run up crushing debts trying to marry her daughters into wealthy families far above their actual means. She spent lavishly on florists, dressmakers, and caterers she could not afford, all in service of appearances that were, in Marden's words, perpetual lies. In the end, she lost her home, and her daughters remained unmarried anyway. He observes that it is rarely our actual lack of comforts that makes us miserable. It is our envy, our need to be seen a certain way by other people's eyes. He puts it memorably. It is other people's eyes that are expensive. We scheme, strain, and go into debt, not to satisfy our own genuine needs, but to manage an impression in the minds of onlookers who, frankly, are usually far too busy managing their own impressions to notice ours much at all. But he balances this with an equally sharp warning against the opposite extreme. The miserly husband who polices every household expense so tightly that joy is squeezed out of the home entirely. He describes a man so obsessed with saving that his wife dreads meal times, And children learn to announce, unprompted, that dinner was chosen because it was the cheapest option available. This kind of false economy, Marden argues, is every bit as destructive to home happiness as reckless extravagance. He gives us the quietly tragic portrait of a self-made millionaire whose wife sacrificed her health, her beauty, and her youth working alongside him through their years of poverty, only to be sidelined and half ignored once the money finally arrived. Her husband instead charming younger, more decorative women at social gatherings. Her devotion built his fortune. His neglect then wasted it, at least where happiness was concerned. The home, Marden concludes, must steer a careful course between the whirlpool of extravagance and the harsh rocks of false economy, finding instead calmer waters of simplicity, thrift, and sane, genuine enjoyment. Contentment, the secret of happiness. Marden describes something he calls Americanitis, a restless, striving, high-speed way of living that blurs past all the beautiful, ordinary details of daily life the way a speeding car blurs past scenery. We are, he says, like riders on the Pony Express, constantly changing from a tired horse to a fresh one without ever actually stopping to look around. He shares Oliver Wendell Holmes' account of his own remarkable vitality even in his 80th year, which Holmes credited entirely to a cheerful disposition and his words, invariable contentment in every period of his life with what he was. Holmes insisted he never felt the pangs of restless ambition, and that it is precisely restlessness and discontent that carve premature wrinkles into a face. Wrinkles, he said, do not appear on faces that have constantly smiled. Contentment, quite literally, is a fountain of youth. Marden makes an important distinction here, though. He is not condemning ambition itself, only the false, overvaulting kind rooted purely in vanity and a desire to outshine others. That particular brand of ambition, he warns, is a fatal guide, because the more it is fed, the more ravenous it becomes. Exactly like a fever that only intensifies the more you try to quench it with the very thing that caused it. He offers a wonderfully simple diagnostic question. If you knew your spouse would be gone within a year, would you still lose your temper over a late dinner or a missed appointment? Of course not. So why reserve your patience only for the tragic and withhold it during the ordinary? He insists that real romance should not end at marriage but continue indefinitely, sustained by the exact same forbearance and courtesy we would offer someone we knew we were about to lose. Home joy killers. Marden introduces us to a memorable character he calls the American hog at home, a man who is perfectly charming and restrained among his friends and business associates, but who drops all self-control the moment he crosses his own threshold, becoming irritable, critical, and cold toward the very people who love him most. He notes, almost sarcastically, that this same man can transform instantly back into a gentleman the moment a doorbell rings and company arrives, which proves the bad behavior was never really beyond his control at all. It was simply vanity choosing when to behave. He is especially sympathetic here to the exhausting, often invisible labor of housewives of his era, describing the grinding, repetitive nature of domestic work performed without the variety, recognition, or rest that a husband's working day typically included. He asks pointed questions of husbands. How often have you taken your wife somewhere in the past year, brought her flowers, or given up an evening with friends to help with the children? Indifference, he warns, wounds a woman's heart even more deeply than outright cruelty, because at least cruelty acknowledges her existence. He describes families who bring nothing but their exhausted leftovers home each evening, the cream of their energy already spent elsewhere, and then wonder why their children shrink from them rather than running joyfully to greet them at the door. The remedy he proposes is refreshingly concrete. Make meal times a genuine occasion for laughter and bright conversation. Encourage a little noise and a little scratch furniture rather than a starved, stunted childhood. And treat the evening hours at home as sacred time, not leftover time. The power of the home joy. Continuing directly from the previous chapter, Marden now celebrates a home at its very best. He insists that gold can furnish a house, but no amount of money has ever actually built a home. What builds a home is tenderness, self-sacrifice, and kindness. Qualities available in equal measure to the poorest family as to the wealthiest. He gives real credit here to the often uncredited influence of wives behind successful men, noting that much of man's public achievement rests quietly on a devoted partner's tact, steadiness, and support, a debt frequently owed but rarely acknowledged. He recommends something remarkably progressive for his era, that household finances be handled as a genuine, respected partnership, with the wife given her own defined portion of the family income to manage entirely as she sees fit, without interrogation, because independence and dignity in this arrangement prevent an enormous amount of domestic friction. He champions music, laughter, and unstructured play as essential ingredients of a truly happy home, insisting that a little romping and a little noise in the evening will do more for a family's well-being than any amount of stiff, overly serious formality. A joyous childhood spent at home. He reminds us, becomes a very oasis a person returns to in memory throughout their entire life. A sweet, sustaining picture that can carry someone through even the hardest later chapters. The vision of a happy home of one's own, he writes, has been one of humanity's single greatest incentives across all of history, driving explorers, inventors, and ordinary strugglers alike toward their goals. The dangers of thwarted ambition. Marden turns here to a quieter, more private kind of suffering, the pain of a talent or ambition that never finds its outlet. He describes a bright, musically gifted young woman who marries a businessman with no appreciation whatsoever for her artistic passion, and slowly fades, not from any single dramatic event, but from a long, invisible starvation of the very gift that once defined her. He observes that women, in particular in his era, had a remarkable way of hiding this kind of grief, suffering their thwarted ambitions in silence rather than open rebellion. Wherever we notice discontent or unrest in someone, Marden suggests, we might consider that they simply have not yet found the right outlet for their particular gift, and their heart has been quietly cheated of its ideal. But he also insists there is real danger in a thwarted ambition left completely unaddressed. A person cut off entirely from their strongest talent becomes susceptible, he warns, to all manner of temptation, sometimes even developing destructive tendencies, because the energy that should have gone into their calling has nowhere productive left to go. The pursuit of one's highest ambition, he argues, functions as a kind of balance wheel for the whole personality, steadying behavior and dignifying the entire being. Remove that outlet, and the whole mechanism can drift dangerously out of alignment. He closes with a striking claim. Man was made for action, and the mind, when properly and normally employed, produces genuine exhilaration and even improved health. There is no stimulant on earth, he insists, quite like the successful pursuit of one's own highest ambition. An idle life, an unhappy life. Here Marden makes his case against idleness with real force. He argues it is simply not possible for any able-bodied human being to be genuinely happy while living a purposeless, idle life, no matter how much money cushions that idleness. Whatever faculty goes unused, he insists, is a faculty on its way toward deterioration, exactly as an abandoned farm or an unused machine gradually falls apart. He shares an observation from the writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman that struck him as profoundly true. The greatest pleasures in life come from expression rather than mere impression. It is more satisfying, she argued, to paint a picture than simply to look at one. More satisfying to sing than merely to listen to someone else singing. We mistakenly believe that having things surpasses doing things. An error, Marden notes, carried to its natural extreme when we start looking down on the very people who actually do the work. He observes something we can all recognize. We enjoy money we have personally earned far more than money we simply inherit, because achievement, not mere possession, is what actually satisfies something built deep into human nature. The idle person, rich or poor, drifts restlessly from one diversion to another, never quite finding satisfaction. Precisely because satisfaction was never designed to come from mere consumption in the first place. Happiness and usefulness, Marden concludes, were born as twins, and separating them is fatal to both. Joy in our work. This chapter contains perhaps Marden's most practical and immediately useful advice. He insists that work was never intended by nature to be a curse or a punishment. It was meant to be, in his words, God's highway to the hills of happiness. Whether our daily labor feels like drudgery or delight, he argues, depends far less on the nature of the work itself than on the spirit we deliberately choose to bring to it. He makes a compelling business argument that employers who create genuine warmth and goodwill in their workplaces consistently get better output, both in quality and quantity, than those who rule through fear, criticism, and harsh treatment. Scolding and slave driving, he writes, have been tried in every business since the beginning of time and have always failed. He compares this to training a horse, noting that gentle encouragement carries a working animal much further than the whip ever could, and insists human beings respond to kindness in exactly the same way. He offers a wonderfully vivid picture of what work should feel like. A young artist can hardly wait to return each morning to his half-finished painting, and a young author feels the same magnetic pull toward the characters he left behind the night before. Marden's challenge to us is this: why should ordinary work feel any different? He believed that if every worker approached their task each morning with that same eager anticipation, we would witness something close to a business millennium. He is careful to distinguish healthy, vigorous effort from destructive overwork, though quoting a physician's warning that it is not good, well-ordered labor that ever killed anyone, but rather the fret and worry loaded on top of it, cramming 2 hours of work into 1 hour at a time. Do not undertake more than you can genuinely accomplish, he counsels, because joy stops being joy the moment it can no longer be carried comfortably. Turning the water of life into wine. Marden gives us here the delightful image of an elderly woman who kept what she called a pleasure book, a simple daily record of small joys, a kind letter, a pretty flower glimpsed in a window, a lost pin recovered, a bouquet of roses from her husband when gloom threatened to settle over her. She would open this book and remind herself, in her own handwriting, just how genuinely blessed her ordinary life actually was. He introduces a concept of what he calls the cheerful man's contagion, describing how a single warm, sunny personality can act on the people around them exactly like summer warmth acts on a field, waking up and calling out the very best that was already dormant inside them. Meeting such a person in the morning, he writes, can make the entire day's struggles feel lighter. He shares the deeply moving true story of Willie Rue, a crippled newsboy who offered his own leg for skin grafting to save a stranger, a young woman he had never even met, and who died from the anesthesia given before the operation. His final words, whispered to his foster mother, were that he had never amounted to much before, but now she could know he had finally done something for somebody. There is no more powerful illustration in the entire book of Marden's core conviction that the deepest, most enduring joy available to any human being comes not from what we accumulate for ourselves, but from what we manage to give away. He closes this chapter with the beautiful image of a cannonball striking a garden during battle, tearing open an ugly crater, out of which a fresh spring of water begins flowing, one that continues running to this day. Our own hidden sorrows, he suggests, can become exactly this kind of blessing to others if we resolve to keep living and keep serving despite the wound. Intellectual and aesthetic joys, continued reflection and longevity and happiness. As Marden brings the book toward its close, he circles back to a theme that has been quietly running underneath everything, the deep connection between our inner disposition and how long and how well we actually live. He tells us bluntly that you cannot measure a person's true age by the calendar. You have to measure the spirit, the temperament, the mental attitude. He knew men in their 60s who were genuinely young and men in their 30s who had already grown old inside. He shares George Meredith's declaration, made on his 74th birthday, that he did not feel himself growing old in either heart or mind, that he still looked upon life with a young man's eye. Marden's explanation for cases like this is that time does not touch serene, well-balanced characters in the same corrosive way it touches anxious, discontented ones. Whatever disturbs our peace of mind creates friction, and friction, quite literally, wears down life's delicate machinery faster than the years themselves ever could. He offers a warning here that feels especially poignant given everything the book has already told us. Men who spend their entire working lives inside one narrow professional rut, and who make no preparation whatsoever for the interests and faculties they will need once they finally retire, often find retirement not liberating but devastating. He describes retired businessmen touring Europe, bored to tears in art galleries their minds were never trained to appreciate, homesick for the very ledgers and customers they once complained about, because those faculties, exercised for decades, were the only ones still fully alive inside them. Charles Darwin himself, Marden reminds us, was genuinely shocked late in life to discover he had lost his once great love of Shakespeare and music, atrophied entirely through decades of exclusive devotion to scientific work. The remedy, as always in this book, is deliberate cultivation, undertaken early and continued throughout an entire lifetime. Keep reading. Keep noticing beauty. Keep your friendships alive. Keep your mind hungry for growth. Do this consistently across all of your years, and old age becomes not a dreaded decline, but what Marden, quoting another writer, calls a portico to a palace beautiful, a stage of life where happiness is neither withered by time nor destroyed by death. So here we are at the end of a book written well over 100 years ago, and yet somehow it reads like it was written for right now, for this exact moment in your own restless, distracted, endlessly striving life. Orison Swett Marden's message, stripped down to its simplest form, is really just this: happiness was never hiding in some future circumstance you have not reached yet. It was never locked inside a bigger paycheck, a nicer house, a more impressive title. It has been sitting quietly in the present moment this entire time, waiting for you to stop racing past it. It has been sitting in the friendship you keep meaning to nurture, in the book on your shelf you keep meaning to open, in the kind word you keep meaning to say, in the ordinary work you keep treating as a grind instead of privilege. Marden spent his whole life insisting that joy is not something that happens to you. It is something you build deliberately out of whatever material today happens to hand you, whether that material looks like sunshine or looks like stone. Do not wait for the fortune, the retirement, the perfect circumstance, because that day, as he warned us so many times throughout this book, may never actually arrive. And even if it does, you may find you'll let the very faculties needed to enjoy it quietly wither away while you were waiting. So go gather your happiness today, fresh like manna, because tomorrow's portion will not keep. And if this book meant something to you, if even one idea from Orison Swett Marden found its way into the part of you that needed it most today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button before you go, because there are so many more of these forgotten old books, full of exactly this kind of quiet wisdom, still waiting to be rediscovered together. Thank you for spending these hours with me, and I will see you in the next one.